Today, I am talking to author, speaker, and podcast host Mary Marantz about the beauty in the broken parts of our stories. This happens to be the theme of her brand new book, which you can get your hands on now, called Dirt: Growing Strong Roots in What Makes the Broken Beautiful. I loved this conversation so much. I could have talked to Mary for hours. I know you're going to love it too, so let's dive in. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in today. I have the honor of interviewing someone who has a story that the little bit I've gotten to learn myself has been a huge inspiration to me. So I know that you all are going to gain so much out of this interview. So Mary, thank you so much for being here.
Oh my gosh, Lindsay, thank you so much for having me. I've been looking forward to this for ever since we got it on the calendar, and our mutual friend Jess Ekstrom just loves you. So I'm just so thankful to get to hang out with you today.
Isn't it true that, the kind of women that I'm sure you surround yourself as well with, they come with others. It's like you open up this treasure chest of just all these incredible women up to big things. And I'm so grateful. Jess has always been one of those people who's more than willing to share contacts and connect friends who have now become personal friends of mine. So
yeah. Have you ever heard of that book, Love is the Killer App? It's like from like a long time ago. I think it came out in like 2006, 2005. And it talks about the concept of being a love cat, which is just sort of like being like one of these people like Dale Carnegie would talk about, like can win friends and influence people. But he says they share their knowledge, their network, and I just think like their inspiration or something, but like their knowledge and their network. So they're always willing to make a connection. They're always willing to send the email. They're always willing to say, oh my gosh, do not do this as hard as I did. And I feel like Jess is like the epitome of that. So, and I feel like
she is.
If you're friends with Jess, then I already know that that's you too. So
yes. Yeah. Oh, that's so well said. Well, we're sending her love. Thank you so much for the connection. And this is when people listen to this episode, it's a really exciting week in your life.
Yes.
When this episode airs, it will be just days out from or I guess just a few days after your book, which we're going to get into, is officially released to the world. But we're recording it a few weeks ahead of time. And we were just sharing before we hit record just what the process feels like right now. I would actually love if you would give us a little glimpse, because this is the real story behind the story that we often see on social media. So as an author, how does it feel right now sitting in the period of time before this creation of yours is released into the world?
Oh man. Well, I'll give you the short answer, which is what I gave you when we were hopping on, which is like, or actually it got a little better. So I'll just say this. It's sort of like that roller coaster in Final Destination where it feels like a big old chunk of the track is missing and you're barreling towards it. So you don't know how it's going to happen. Will you jump, it's sort of like Speed is coming in there. Will you jump the bridge and land it? Or, basically all the movies where you're on the brink of disaster or success. It could go either way.
Yep.
Not to make it too dramatic at all. But no, it does. I mean, when it's you, when you're in the midst of it, it really is, you constantly have to remind yourself, I am not my feelings. My feelings are not truth. My feelings matter and they exist, but that doesn't mean that they're the truth. And so to kind of go a little more, in a real answer to you, this is actually a great time to be doing this call and asking this question, because literally last night at 5:30 p.m., we sent out the email to our launch team that said they could start reading. And so that's my first taste of, oh, you mean people are actually going to read these words? And so I hopped into the group before we sent the email and I was like, this is such a mixed feeling, because on the one hand, I'm so excited and this is what we've been waiting for. But on the other hand, it feels a little bit like everybody come into the Facebook group and now I shall get naked. It's like, it's a very deeply personal book. It's a memoir, so it's my story, but it's also in every way when I wrote this book. In fact, and we'll get into this, I'm sure, there was a major overhaul driven by me. I was the one who said we had to do it between draft 1 and draft 2, because draft 1 became very much like biography. This is my story. This is my story. This is my story. But the book that I wanted to write is all of our stories. Yeah. It's this feeling that people, when they hear it, when they're listening to different scenes from my life, they see themselves in it, you know, whether it's in a trailer in West Virginia or some other version of that. And so it's this final draft that people will hold in their hands is deeply, deeply, deeply personal. And I talk about things I've never talked about before. And I think when you are going to write a story like that has the power to help people kind of find some healing in their own story, like we were saying, you can expect that resistance for sure. So,
Yeah.
man, the resistance has been coming in pretty hardcore. We were talking a little bit before we hopped on. There are going to be haters that come out, which is, I mean, honestly, like I even feel kind of silly saying the word haters because I can only hear like the Taylor Swift song. But there are going to be people who come out when you get brave enough to tell the truth about your story. There are going to be people who say you shouldn't be telling your story. You shouldn't be telling, you know, or that's not the truth or what have you. So that's been really hard to navigate because it's almost like there's something about the level of, or the stakes of a book. Like I've talked about small parts of this before and never had that. And now it's like, it all just sort of tells me that there's something in this book people need to see. Yeah. And they need to read. So it's been, I mean, the real messy, muddy answer is it's hard. Yeah. It's really, 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 it's hard to write a book. I thought that was going to be the hardest part. I was like, just get me to the marketing part. Let's do that. No, like, I mean, I sat for 12 hours a day over last winter and just wrote the book, rewrote the book. And now it's like that you have to like let your baby out into the world and hope that everybody takes care of it. Yeah. That's hard.
Yeah. Oh, I can relate so much. It's actually bringing me back to releasing my own book a couple of years ago. And I remember, and maybe this will serve you too, but I just remember a little bit before I released, right, that baby into the world. That's such a beautiful picture. I picked up a new book by an author I actually love. Someone I love. I love listening to their content. I would consume a lot of it. And for whatever reason, this book didn't resonate. It was, and it was this beautiful, it happened for me for a reason, because I realized, oh, wow, I actually love this person, but this book right now just isn't for me. And it actually gave permission for me not to be so attached that everyone's life had to be changed by my book, or that it was going to be received with only hate or love, that there's actually an in-between where it's like, maybe not for me right now, or maybe just this book was written and meant for someone else. And it was the most beautiful experience of realizing that, exactly like you said, we're often given the little nudge to do these projects based on someone we may never meet who needed to hear the story, and we just have to trust. Yeah. Oh gosh, you're bringing me right back there. And that's going to truly contribute to so many people listening who are sitting there right now at the beginning of their big idea and not realizing who it might serve.
Yeah, that's so true, because I was saying this, I also, in addition to opening up our launch team, I recorded the audiobook this week. So very, very busy week. We recorded the very last line of the audiobook yesterday. And one of the things that we did for that, for like a bonus content, is I kind of went through and, you know, it was just sort of like walking through like plays on words that people might not immediately have gotten, or like hidden meanings, like the Easter egg guide to the audiobook. And, you know, I was just sort of like thinking through, what it looks like to like put a message out there and, you know, believe with your whole heart that it's like, this was not my story. This was not, like, these were not just my words. Like, I mean, I don't know like how deep you get with like faith on the show, but like, I feel like God wrote this book through me, you know?
I had the exact experience like that to a T. That's how I described it. There are parts of the book that I just didn't write.
Yeah. Yeah. Like you'd sit down at the keyboard, like I have no idea what I'm going to write today. And so, you know, I think, I just think that there's something to be like, so this approach to writing a book where you believe that every person who does pick it up and read it, it's an answer to a prayer. It's not just your prayer of like, oh, please let people buy this book. It's an answer to their prayer. And it's a message that they needed right in that moment and right in that season. And so there's so much in there for people who are probably like a lot of your listeners who maybe are like the most put together woman in the room. And they're the woman you would never, ever know by looking at her, by the way she's dressed or the way she leads or the confidence with which she carries herself. You would never know the muddy story that she's kind of running from in her past. Yeah. And Just to think about all of those women who are already so successful by masking and putting capes on to hide that story. What I see is a whole generation of women who are going to just like shake loose and break loose these chains and run towards their purpose when they're not wasting all this frenetic energy looking left and looking right and just trying to like hold it together in this perfect picture of a like, it's like in My Cousin Vinny, when he holds up a playing card, he's like, they're going to show you a brick and it's like got the right dimensions and it looks right on this side. But when you turn it to one edge, it goes really like thin, it falls apart. When those women no longer feel like they have to put the perfect side of the brick forward, they're going to realize that that perfection was not a brick, that perfection was a wall. When these women like realize that this brick that they're holding up is not just a brick, it's a wall that they're actually putting up that's keeping not other people at arm's length, but keeping them walled in, and they're suffocating, we're suffocating when we do that. Like all of that energy that's like, just hold it together, just like put out the right image, the right perception. As soon as you're just like, this is me, this is my story, this is where I came from, I will shake off these shame stories and I will run forward. Man, like the energy that's going to free up in the lives that are going to be changed, not from me to these women, but those women to the rest of the world. That's what I'm excited about.
Yeah. Oh, okay. That's so juicy already. And I think the perfect place to, well, transition to, I won't even say start. I'm like, we're already in it. We're in it. I love to hear women's stories. What inspired the thing that they're most passionate about right now? And what's beautiful is that your book is really written from your story, like you said. So the title, I'm going to preface it with this, and then I'd love to hear your inspiration behind it and really share your story, how you went from that girl in the trailer to the woman that you are now. But the book is called Dirt. That's the title. Growing Strong Roots in What Makes the Broken Beautiful. So delicious. So take us through what inspired you first and foremost to share this story, to share this piece of your heart and soul. And then what is the story that we're going to get to learn so much more about in the book?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer to you, Lindsay, is that I have felt like I was supposed to become a writer my entire life. And so, I mean, like we'll say like about 5 years old is when I felt like I first, and that's a very specific age and young age to feel that way. But I really felt like I can remember some specific instances of driving past the birthplace of Pearl Buck, who grew up in West Virginia, not far from me. And there's a little plaque outside that says like birthplace of Pearl Buck. And she was the author of The Good Earth, and it won a Nobel Prize and a Pulitzer Prize. And I just felt like, man, she's from where I'm from. And she was able to go, it didn't matter. She was still able to go do incredible things. And she was able to do it in a way that brought honor back to West Virginia. And so I really, truly feel like when I was about 5, and I was that weird kid who would walk through our yard, like thinking in narrative. She walked through the yard and picked up a toy. It's like, that's how I thought, even as a little kid. I just feel like I was always supposed to be a writer. And then, 35 years later, I kind of got around to it. So there's like this very long kind of meandering journey through having a business and going to law school, which is a big part of the story. So the short answer is I feel like I was always supposed to write not just a book, but this book, this story. Because I felt called even at a young age, God saying to me, listen, you hate this trailer growing up and you hate that this is your story, but I have not even begun to start writing yet. And like one day I'm going to put words to this and it's going to make sense to you in a way that it's just going to blow your mind. Like I've barely even started writing. You're judging the whole book by the first sentence. Just wait. Yeah. And so I feel like this has been a long time coming, but it's also kind of like, and I don't know if you felt this way with your book or maybe like one of the events or like your business, like the second I finally, and I say finally because there's an element of like, I was in my own way, but I also fully believe that the timing of this was planned. Yeah. Like there's something about this being the year I turned 40. There's something about this being the year 2020 and what 2020 has been. Like, there's not a doubt in my mind that this happened when it was supposed to, but I was also in my own way. Anyway, like all of that coming together, when you finally start stepping into what you are called to do, like all the other stuff I tried and just kind of kept hitting like a brick wall, a brick wall, a brick wall. And as soon as you really start just like finally saying, you know what, there's this thing I can't go a day without thinking about, so I'm just going to lean into it. Stuff just really starts happening and you just feel different on the inside. I don't know if if that
Yeah.
resonates or you've ever had that,
It
but you just
so
feel different.
does.
Yeah.
And it made sense of even the parts where I was getting in my own way and really judging myself for doing so. Those
Yeah.
were ultimately became the catalyst so I could understand where other women were and the place they might be in when they were receiving the message. It just gave me like this compassion that I wouldn't have had otherwise. And I think that's you really tie that together so beautifully, because it's easy to judge the times when we know we're sabotaging or getting in our own way, but sometimes we have to experience it before we can really make an impact on others who are experiencing it too.
Yeah. And I think I would also just say to everybody listening, maybe you have been dragging your feet. Maybe you have waited longer than you should have. Maybe you have been coming up with every excuse that we are all so good at coming up with of, I have to wait until it's perfect, or I have to wait until I get permission, or gosh, like, I don't think I could do it perfectly the first time out, so I won't, or who's going to care, or somebody else is already doing it, or somebody's doing it better, or, I'm not equipped, or I'm not prepared, or, just all of these reasons that we're so, I'm not enough of something. I'm not as something as her. It's easy for her. There's just this unending list. And maybe you are that person who's like really put it off longer than you should. What I would say to you is like, trust that when you are stepping into what you're called to, and again, going into a faith place, for me, I believe that God can still say, yeah, you probably did wait longer. I'm glad you finally like hopped on board, but like I can make, loaves and fishes, for lack of a better analogy. I can make up for that time, and like, let's stop making like 25 or 30 or 35 like too late to go chase your purpose. Like anytime that you step into that, if you're like finally ready to lean into that thing you're supposed to do, I feel like the thing itself will help propel you forward and make up for that lost time.
I relate to that so much. One of truly the driving factors behind actually completing the book was remembering, and actually in this closet, if you could see us on the YouTube version here, the closet right behind me sat podcast equipment for a podcast I never started. So there were all these other big ideas that never actually got off the ground. And this was the one for me. And some of you are going to need to hear this, right? That there finally came the day where I was like, okay, if not this one, then what? This will just get added to that closet. That closet's only so big. I can only keep so many dead dreams that I never took action on in that closet. Like eventually it's got to be one of these. And I love how you put that. I don't think there's actually a perfect one or a right one. It's the one that you're willing to take action on. So beautiful.
Love it.
Okay, so let's go back to the girl. I love how you shared that the 5-year-old version of you knew that you were meant to write. And then if we look at the contrast between that girl and the life that you have now, or the version of you that went to Yale Law School, this Ivy League school, I love how you talk about, I love the way you put this, the messy middle. How important has that messy middle been in shaping your journey? And what are a few of the points in that journey that stand out in your mind that truly shaped the woman that you are today?
Yeah. Well, my first instinct is to say, if I ever get out of the messy middle, I'll let you know.
Okay, perfect. Great. Yeah.
And I think that is one of those things that keeps us stuck in our own heads and just really paralyzed from moving forward, is that we are always waiting until our lives don't feel just a little bit chaotic, or we don't feel a little bit chaotic, or we feel like what we imagine the people we look up to feel like, but they don't feel that way. And it's the second you can really start to wrap your head around that, like nobody you're looking up to or watching feels like they're walking around like, with like wind blowing through their hair and like a shampoo commercial or whatever. Nobody feels that way. We're all sort of waiting for that mystical day to arrive, but it doesn't happen. And so, I think that's important to remember, because here's a really good analogy for that. Like when you were in 7th grade, maybe, or like 8th grade, and you looked at people who were seniors in high school and you were like, oh, they're so grown up and they're so sophisticated and
Yes.
they're just about to go to college and like they're like adults basically. And I can't wait until I'm there. And then you become a senior in high school and you're like, well, it's not that I'm not like psyched to be a senior and it's going to be a fun year, hopefully, but I do not feel like what I thought it was going to feel like.
Yeah.
We spend our whole lives doing that. When I'm there, it'll feel different. When I'm there, I'll feel qualified. When I'm there, I'll feel put together. When I'm there, I'll feel successful. Let's get down to it. When I'm there, I'll feel successful. And there never arrives because every time you get there, there's another benchmark off in the distance. So the messy middle is a place you got to get comfortable with because, you know, basically, if we really break it down, the messy middle is your life and the other bookends are your birth and your death, right? And so we will spend our whole lives. Man, I think if I ever get to a place where I'm like, no, I don't feel stretched and I don't feel uncomfortable, I'll know that I've gotten really complacent, you know? And that's different than saying I have peace that surpasses all understanding in the midst of the mess. That's different than saying my identity is unshaken by the fact that it is messy because I know where my identity lies. But this idea that we're ever just going to be like, well, look at me now and actually feel that way, it's a never-ending story, to quote an 80s movie, that we could chase our whole lives. That's the first thing I would say.
Yeah.
But what the messy middle has really given me, especially some of the messier parts of the middle, is a grit and a tenacity and an ability to fall down 7 times, pick yourself up 8. Like, I've just become kind of a keep calm and carry on kind of person because when you run a business for 15 years, you learn that every single day you got to wake up, deal with the stuff that's going crazy and figure out a way to keep moving forward, even though it's imperfect. So I think it's given me grit, tenacity, resiliency, the ability to fall down and get back up again. But I think even more than that, my story in the messy middle has given me an empathy. And I think you can kind of feel this the second you're with someone. There's just something about people who've had harder stories that the hard edges are rounded off. In the book Dirt, I talk about it's like progressively finer grits of sandpaper. And there's this amazing Elizabeth Kubler-Ross quote that I kind of keep on repeat that says, beautiful people don't just happen. And so the second I realized, hey, I could have snapped my fingers and gotten an easy story or gotten somebody else's story I wanted when I was growing up. But in doing so, I would have lost all this grit and all this empathy. The second the grit and the empathy become more valuable to you than an easy story or like this life that looks perfect from the outside, I think that's growth. I think that's when you know you're really starting to lean into who you were made to be. I would rather be empathetic. I would rather be kind. I would rather have grit than to just have always had an easy time of it.
That's so beautifully said. And it really captures the other thing that I love. This is what makes me most excited to get my hands on a copy of the book is just this idea of looking at our roots, right? And so often I can relate to that feeling when you gave the analogy of being in high school, right? We want to get there. We don't want to look backward. We want to move forward. Maybe there's parts of our stories we would rather just forget or erase altogether.
Yeah.
Why is it so important for us to remember our roots, in your opinion?
I feel like I feel like this is what it comes down to for me is that so many of us are walking around as if our stories are shackles around our ankles. They're these very, very heavy weights that we're sort of like limping along, dragging behind us. And we will be set free when we realize our stories are not shackles around our ankles. Our stories are these deep roots that anchor us into the ground. They're this place that, gives us, you want to stand up tall, you're going to need backbone. And you get backbone from those stories. You get backbone from being rooted into something and anchored into something. And the second you can realize your story is what allowed you to kind of sink your fingers into the ground, find that nourishment of what is going to shoot up the back of you. That's going to be this hold your head up high, lift your arms up high and worship and say, in finding my roots, that's what allows me to stand taller. That's what allows me to stretch my arms out wider. And so, we can just really beat that analogy to death. But I think it's we're trying to get somewhere, we're trying to run somewhere, and we feel like we're limping when all along, all we needed to do was stand up in the place that we've been put, stand tall, lift our arms high, And so I just feel like getting rooted in where you come from, it's basically saying, there's no way you're truly, I saw this quote the other day. I'm Terrence Lester. That's his Instagram handle, Terrence Lester. And his wife shared it, and it said, "It is impossible to love yourself without loving the story that made you." And so I think that's really what it is. It's about saying, gosh, it's not like I'm like, yay, mildew, yay, leaky trailer, yay, you know, bugs in the kitchen or whatever. But it is, yay, man, you would never, ever, ever make somebody feel small, because you know what it's like to feel small. You know what it's like to feel like you're always going to stand on the outside because your story disqualifies you, or you're not enough of something to stand in that circle. So you will go through this life making sure every other person feels seen, making sure every other person's heart is safe in your hands, because you lived that hard story. You cannot hate a hard story that turns you into that kind of person.
Yeah. Was there ever a time in your journey where you did relate to your own story as more of the shackles, the burden, like you shared?
Yeah, for sure. Oh, for sure. I would say I probably spent the first 18 years of my life thinking, well, I was just born this way. I was just born with a story where I will always be the last place person. I will always be the one who's an outsider, which is, I think something that's really important to share is one of the things I talk about in the book is becoming this like most put together woman in the room, or like running so far from your failure that you stumble into success, or achieving for your worth. In high school, I was president of my class. I was head cheerleader. I was on, student council, prom committee chairperson. And so, what's been really powerful in starting to release this book is hearing from some of the people in high school who were like, I never knew. I had no idea that you went home to a trailer, because like you never projected that. And like even some of the like girls who would like, I would get dropped off on the way home from cheerleading practice. They'd like, I knew you lived in a trailer, but you never seemed to let it bother you, kind of thing. But it did. But I was already learning how you achieve for your worth. So yes, I spent a lot of time feeling like I will always have the not healthy boyfriend relationships. I will always have, I'll struggle in building a life. I'll never have a nice house. I'll never have a nice marriage. Because there's just something that happens in your brain when you grow up with that a lot, where you expect to fail before you've even tried. And that's why people like us run so hard, because we feel like we have to overcome our built-in propensity to fail. And in doing that, we end up overshooting the mark and actually landing in success, which is crazy.
Yeah. Gosh, I can relate to that idea of achieving in order to find our worth. What is your advice for people who are hearing that now and going, oh my gosh, she's talking straight to me?
Yeah.
And what's your advice to start to loosen that grip? Because I know personally firsthand, being very type A, being very much the achiever, I think it's a gift. I think God made me that way in a lot of ways to get stuff done on this planet. And yet it can be my biggest downfall. It can have me operate and almost go unconscious in just this pattern of chasing after the next achievement.
Yeah. Oh man, that's a great question. So the first thing I'll say is, I had Ian Morgan Cron on my podcast, the Mary Marantz show, not too long ago. And I've had people on my show where there were tears. It was the first time I burst into tears doing the interview.
Wow.
And so his book, The Road Back to You, I don't know if you've read it or not, but it talks about how the Enneagram and the different personality types, I'm guessing we would both be 3s, which is the achiever, that we like a big misunderstanding about the Enneagram is a lot of people will feel like those specific personality types are just how I was born. It's how I was born to be. And there are things that you were born to be, and being very like driven and out to create purpose and be a leader. Those are absolutely things you can be born with. But being an achiever in particular, or any of the types, are actually the masks that we learn to put on when we're little kids, because somewhere along the line we got the message that that's what we had to be in order to be loved. And so a perfectionist will feel like their room always had to be tidy in order for them to be loved, for example. Or a peacemaking child was the one who was never any trouble, and they heard that message, well, you were such an easy kid, you were never any trouble. So they feel like they can never make any trouble or they won't be loved. So the Enneagram is like understanding these things we put on when we're little kids, and we needed it to protect us from wounds and trauma that we thought we had to become in order to be loved. And our life, our adult life, is about being willing to take that mask off.
Yeah.
So even if I launch this book and it flops, who are the people who will still love me? Who will Mary be? And there's a part in the book, I work with a coach named Kim, where she writes my name huge on a poster board on this kitchen island right here. She lists out all my goals for the year and she marks them all out. And she's like, so if none of these come true next year, who is Mary? What remains? And I was like, nothing. And then I was like, oh, okay, we got some work to do. So to really kind of like get into the answer of like, how do you go about letting go of achieving for your worth? First of all, super check out that book because it's been changing my life. The Road Back to You, Ian Morgan Cron. But the other thing I would say is, to a certain extent, people who are wired for achieving, or people who are just really capable and high performing, high achieving kind of people, highly capable people, to a certain extent, everybody listening, myself included, will have to go out and try it for their own. You will have to go out and say, but you don't know how much I can achieve. You don't know how much I'm capable of, just how much I can accomplish in a day. And you'll have to go see for yourself, to a certain extent, that the second you mark a goal off the list, you hardly even make time to celebrate anymore, because in your head, you're already on to the next things that have to happen. And you'll do that for a little while and a little while. It's sort of like when you're running a business and people are like, you're headed for burnout. And you're like, you don't know how capable I am. I'll sleep when I'm dead. And then
Watch
you burn
me.
out. You hit that brick wall going 90 miles an hour. And you're like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, so I am human. So to a certain extent, you have to experience for yourself that there's no amount of achievements that will fill. Not coming from our side. I just heard some sirens.
I can't hear it on my end. So you're
awesome.
Totally good.
Cool. So to a certain extent, you have to experience for yourself that there are no amount of achievements that can fill that hole. There's a part in the book where I talk about, for me, it was less a hole in my heart and more like a root canal the size of a chest wound right through my torso that I was trying to backfill with gold stars and designer labels. And please don't hear designer labels and think that I mean like super fancy. I just meant like, clothes that I was the first one who owned them kind of thing. And, it's grades and it's law school and it's, awards in college or what have you, and going to England for a year. And I walk into the law school wearing a brand new J. Crew gray cardigan that I thought was going to be the only costume I had to put on to belong. And I still smell the smell of vanilla perfume mixed with mildew as I walk through the doors, So you have to experience for yourself that you are never, ever going to be able to achieve your way into worth. You're never going to be able to achieve your way into love. Go achieve by all means, because the achievers, here's the other thing I'll say to you, Lindsay, and maybe you're thinking this right now, is as soon as I'm like, you can never achieve your way into worth, you're like, I hate this because I love achieving. Listen to me. As soon as you free yourself up from the idea that you are not, more or less valuable or more or less loved because of your achieving, it actually has the opposite effect where you are freed up to run towards these things you want to achieve, because if you get them, it doesn't change who you are.
Totally.
Yeah. So I think that's it. You got to experience it a little bit for yourself. And then when you're ready to say, okay, you're right, Mary, maybe I need to find better ways to define what makes me worthy of love. Then I think you're ready to kind of come to this place of, let me start with, who am I without all this stuff, without the house, without the dogs, without the J. Crew jacket or whatever. Who am I if I can't say I went to Yale Law School? Who am I if I can't say, oh, I have this podcast and I wrote a book and I have events? Who, like, what makes me a person worthy of space in the planet that is called Earth? If it's not, I'm connected and I can tell you, I can introduce you to people, or I have followers, or I have an email list this size, or I've earned this much money.
Yeah.
If you strip all that away, like there's a really great activity that they do as like an icebreaker at events where it's like, go up to a stranger and tell them something you love about them, but you can't say anything physical. You can't say, I love your sweater, I love your jacket, I love your hair, I love your eyes. Like, that's hard. What would you say to a stranger if you can't just do something surface and superficial? So it's looking at yourself in the mirror, maybe a little bit of a stranger you've become to yourself, and saying, here's what I love about you that has nothing to do with anything physical. Yeah.
Oh, that's so good. So as people get their hands on the book, And we're going to want them to definitely do that. I'll have you share
Yeah.
in a moment where they can find it and all of the bonuses, how they can become a part of everything you're creating. But what is your hope for the book? What do you hope readers take away?
Yeah. Going into the book, I had a pretty strong feeling that a lot of it was going to be about this journey of one of my favorite parts of the book. It's very, so it's a very heartbreaking story at times and a very serious story through most of it, but there's also just a ton of witty banter and movie culture, pop culture references. So one of my favorite parts of the book kicks off part 2, kind of not the beginning of part 2, but pretty early on. And it says, I believe there's a reason why once people get everything they ever wanted in a movie, that's when the credits roll and the music swells and we flip the channel. And that's because there's a reason for that. Like, nobody wants to know what happens in the story after somebody got everything they ever wanted. But what if success was where the real trouble began? Because the second you get everything you thought you ever wanted and you still feel like there's something missing, that's when our hero has to do the work of healing that no success can fill, So I kind of always knew there's this great part in it where it's like, we're underdog people, take your football and go home, Rudy, enough with your, I got everything I ever wanted nonsense. And so this whole second half of the book is me figuring out how to find my way back home to that little girl, the girl in the trailer, to little Mary, and saying, I'm really sorry for all the years I spent dragging you along, screaming in your face about how you had to run faster, perform more, be more, do more for anybody to love you. And I'm going to come back and I'm going to find my way back to you and say, I just hope you'll sit in this moment with me and let me tell you that you were always somebody worth loving. And this other stuff's great, and go run towards that if it sets your heart on fire. But you don't have to do another thing in order for God to love you. You don't have to do another thing in order to be worthy of other people's love. So I sort of always knew that was going to be a big part of it. The second half of it that really surprised me in writing this book, and there was a huge change in the book from draft 1 to draft 2 that represents this. We call it the but God turning of the page between draft 1 and draft 2, is that it actually became kind of an anthem for forgiveness and letting go of hurts that you've carried for years, and reconciliation with, maybe people in your family you haven't been in touch with us in a long time. And that this idea of reconciliation is worth the fight. So I think there are going to be a lot of people after they read this book who are going to be kind of emboldened to have the hard conversations and make the hard phone calls. And I know going into it for me, between draft 1 and draft 2, if you would have told me a 3-hour conversation could have opened up that much healing and had kicked off that much possibility of reconciliation, I never would have believed you. But this whole book is the proof. Yeah.
So where can we find copies, or where would it help you most for us to buy copies from?
Oh, yes, that's a great question. Well, we actually are putting together a site just for your audience. So it's going to be our normal site. It'll be thebookdirt.com, but then it's / Powerhouse Women. Women or woman? We'll make sure we get that right.
Is women, plural.
Women, plural. Perfect.
So that's how people will probably search for it. Cool.
Awesome. Yeah. So thebookdirt.com / Powerhouse Women. And that will bring you to a site that'll show you all sorts of pre-order bonuses. We just announced today that you're going to, if you order the pre-order or order the hardcover copy, you're going to get the full audiobook as a bonus, which we're super excited about. So 2 books for one. There's a video course we're putting out that's Learn Storytelling with Mary Marantz. There is a 6-week fall coaching program. There's a launch day event with a whole lineup of speakers. There's a documentary with my dad, who's a huge character in the book. So we met up with him and filmed a documentary. And there's just a bunch of fun stuff like that, little discount codes and stuff like that. So check out the site and you can see all the bonuses and hopefully grab a copy.
Okay, and we'll link all of that in the show notes so you can easily find it. And then here's what I would love to do. I love to do this when I have fellow authors on the show, because this really is, I know what it takes to put your story out in this form, and we're going to be celebrating right along with you and sharing it. But if you loved this episode, share something that you took away. Just take a quick screenshot, tag Mary, tag myself, so we can see it. And then we're going to pick a few people and send you a copy of the book on us, just to really, just to honor the work that it really did take for you to put this out into the world. And
oh my gosh, I love it.
so grateful that you took the time to come here and just share. I feel like at times I forgot I was the interviewer. I was just so engrossed in what you were saying. So if that says anything about your storytelling ability, your ability to really move hearts with your words, I know what dirt is going to do and the ripple effect it's going to have. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. This was amazing. And I love that, I just love that I got to see you the whole time. I feel like sometimes with the shows, you're just sort of talking in the kitchen by yourself.
Yeah.
So this is incredible. You're an incredible interviewer. So thank you so much.
Well, I have one final question, and this will really be, I think this will be a great question for the season that you're in as we're recording this a few weeks before the book comes out. But we've been talking a lot in our community this year about acknowledging the times when we are great, even in the middle of our mess, when we can stop and acknowledge our greatness. And so we just call that a powerhouse moment. So it can be anything in the past couple of weeks or in this season as you're really just finding the whole range of emotions you can possibly feel.
Yeah.
When is a moment that just sparks in your mind right now? When now looking back, you're like, you know what? I was a total powerhouse in that moment.
Yeah. Well, like I was saying, we just released the book to the audio let me start that again. We just released the book to the launch team last night, 5:30 p.m. And what was really cool is I woke up this morning and there were a lot of people, basically everybody was saying, I went to bed at 1 a.m, basically I couldn't put it down. And a huge number of comments saying, I saw myself so much in this story. And that's my biggest prayer for this book is that I am telling my story, but it's all of our stories. It's every single one of us, whether you grew up in the trailer girl or you just had something really brutal and hard happen and you're afraid if you tell anybody about that, it will disqualify you or people will turn their faces from you in some sort of sympathy shame on your behalf. Anything that makes you feel like you do not fit in because it's this story you've lived. I feel like the fact that people are seeing themselves and it's just this is the book that I needed right now in this season. So I just felt like everything we saw in the comments from this launch team is everything I've been praying for these words. And that made me feel like a powerhouse.
Oh, that is so perfect. And honestly, I cannot wait to have my own experience with that. So everyone grab a copy of Dirt and share your takeaways. That just goes to show it really means the world when you can acknowledge the difference that someone's words or their podcast or their book made in your life. So Mary, this was just such a treat. I hope we get to do this again.
Oh, me too. You have to come on my show and hang out.
Okay, perfect. It's a date.
Done.